Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating whether or not trans women are women, and we're starting right now with Vaush's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us, Vaush. The floor is all yours.
Hello, I'm Vaush. Okay, so there are two basic arguments here. First of all, the idea of sex and gender being distinct categories. They obviously are. I don't think anybody disbelieves this. There are obviously things that we refer to, which are in the purview of the experience of being a man and a woman, which are not defined biologically. Whether it be light blue and pink being distinguished gendered colors, the clothing that we wear, the way we style our hair, these are things which are not derivative of our biology. They are derivative of social standards which change. You can look at other parts of the world in which they're different. You can look at different points in time within our own country, and they are different. There's no getting around that. It's not like biology is changing rapidly year to year as the fashions do. If people don't like, the idea of gender and sex being separate, then we can simply say that when I refer to gender, I'm referring to some other separate category that is not sex, but describes social differences that tend to be associated with sexual ones. And once you have that nailed down, the following argument is one of utility. We construct definitions. We do it to serve our own purposes as humans. The only reason definitions exist is because they serve us. We are their masters. And if I believe, as is the case, by the way, of many medical and psychiatric institutions, if we believe that the definition of woman being one tied entirely to sexual differentiation is arbitrary, inconsistent, and harmful, and that there is a more utility-serving definition one could use, say by self-identification, then that is the one that I will use. I have no interest whatsoever in abiding by some harmful, arbitrary standard out of a need to stick to tradition when there's a perfectly serviceable and better one that makes people more happy and hurts nobody lying right there. And that is why I say prescriptively that trans women are women, and descriptively, they have been treated as women historically in our society in varying extents throughout history, depending on the culture and time period. It's a complicated business, but we can get there.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening, Vaush. And if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, want to let you know, folks, we're a neutral platform hosting debates, panels, and discussions on virtually every topic. Want to let you know, we hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. And I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Bogardus for his opening as well. Want to remind you, the speaker's views are their own. So the speakers are not speaking on behalf of any institution that they are affiliated with or have been affiliated with. And Dr. Thomas Bogardus is an associate professor of philosophy. He earned his PhD from the University of Texas and works in the areas of epistemology, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of gender. You can find his publications on his website by Googling his name, and both guests are linked in the description right now. With that, Dr. Bogardus, thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours for your opening as well.
All right. Can I share my screen?
You bet.
Okay. So everybody can see that, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so if you're unable to see this for some reason, you should know that the slides are available at tinyurl.com/moderndaydebate_June, the month of June, and there's no spaces or capitals in there. Okay, I'm just gonna start my timer right now. So the topic of our conversation today is this sentence, trans women are women, whether trans women are women. And what I want to try to do is explain why this is such a persistent philosophical question. I started thinking about this about 6 or 7 years ago. And so I'm going to share some of the things I've learned in that time and try to convey to you the landscape of the debate as I see it in a way that I hope will be useful and interesting no matter what your views are on this topic. And to try to explain why it's a persistent philosophical question, specifically what I'm going to do is try to show how on 6 common interpretations of this sentence, trans women are women, including 5 that Vaush has explored and endorsed, the sentence turns out not to be true. So just a quick, I think, obvious clarification. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that when people say trans women are women, what they mean is all trans women are women, not just some. So I think that's the question under consideration, whether all trans women are women. Now, to see whether that's true or false, to evaluate whether that's true or false, I think we would have to get clear on what it means to be a woman. We'd have to think about the meaning of that word woman in order to see whether it's true that all trans women are women. And so now I'm going to consider those views I promised a second ago. The first view is what we might call a biological view, according to which women are adult human females. Now, I think this is the sort of traditional, historical, ordinary sense of the word. This is what the word ordinarily means. There are a few reasons to think that. We can talk about these in the discussion period if you'd like. First of all, there's words for other species that we use for the adult males and the adult females of those species. And it would be pretty surprising if we didn't have similar words for the adult males and adult females of our species. This is the definition that virtually all dictionaries give. Of course, dictionaries aren't infallible. They make mistakes. But the fact that this is what dictionaries say is some evidence that this is the way the word is ordinarily used. But most importantly, I think the strongest bit of evidence is that, as far as I can tell, virtually all trans-inclusive philosophers agree that this is the ordinary use of the word. That doesn't mean they recommend it, but they acknowledge and concede that this is what people ordinarily mean. I'm not sure whether Vaush agrees. He said some things that sound like he might disagree. Just a few days ago, he said, there's so much arbitrarity with how these terms get posed. I don't think that a biologically prescriptivist attitude towards gender is the historically correct one. So possibly Vaush disagrees with this. But as I said, a lot of trans-inclusive philosophers agree that this is the way the word is used in dominant mainstream contexts. So here are some quotations. I'll let you read those on your own. But Robin Dembrov, Mari Mikola, Sally Haslinger, Jennifer Saul, these are all philosophers working very much from a trans-inclusive direction. Simone de Beauvoir seems to use the word in this ordinary biological way as well. Again, that's not to mean they recommend this definition. A lot of these philosophers think that this is a problem and we need to change it, because when you think about the question whether all trans women are women, if being a woman requires being biologically female, then these philosophers think it's going to turn out that not all trans women are women. In fact, none are. And they consider that to be a problem. Here's a quotation from Katherine Jenkins saying as much, saying that if you fail to respect the gender identifications of trans people, that's a serious harm. And I think Vaush would agree that that is a problem. Back in 2021, he said, if someone makes an argument that a person isn't a woman when they claim to be a woman, I would say that's transphobic. And then here's another quotation saying something similar. I'll let you read. Okay, so as I say, a lot of philosophers wish to move away from this view of what it means to be a woman. And one alternative that they've explored is what we might call a social role view, according to which to be a woman is to be someone who functions or behaves or is treated a certain way socially. Now, sometimes Vaush seems to endorse this sort of view. Here's an example from back in March. So he says, I am a gender abolitionist, so I don't want these designations at all. But as long as they exist, these designations, man and woman, we're talking about social roles. And again, just a few days ago, so he says, given how arbitrary these definitions are, I think one where we acknowledge that man and woman, as we refer to it generally, is a social trend, something which refers to social roles and attitudes, not biology. That's probably the one that hurts the fewest people. Okay, so that's the social role view. And now the question before us is, does this sentence come out as true or false on the social role view? Will it be true that all trans women are women? Well, to figure that out, we'd have to know exactly what social role we're talking about. What is the social role that is taken to be definitive of womanhood? And it turns out it's pretty hard to say what social role we're talking about exactly, given, as Vaush said in his opening statement, all the variation across time and culture. It's hard to say what social role is had in common by all and only women throughout time and place. But even if you found one and said, there, that's the social role that's definitive of being a woman, there's a problem because there's no guarantee that all trans women will play that role, will occupy that position in society. Katherine Jenkins, again, a trans-inclusive philosopher, criticizes the social role view on those grounds, saying there may well be, and there easily could be, and there may in fact be, trans individuals who do not present as women, and so are not treated as women, don't play this role, don't occupy this position in society. Or there could be trans individuals who do present as women, but aren't read as women, or aren't taken seriously, or aren't treated as women, in which case they won't occupy the right position in society in order to count as a woman on this social role view. So my sense of the state of play in the current philosophical debate is philosophers have moved away from this social role view because it turns out false that all trans women are women on this view. And at least in the popular culture and even in the philosophical literature, the view that's sort of rising to prominence is a self-ID view. I think that's coming to be the most popular view, as I said, at least at the popular level. So on this view, we're told to be a woman is to be someone who identifies as a woman.
More coffee.
And I won't be the first to notice that, oh, well, here's a quotation from Vaush endorsing that, by the way. Okay, but I won't be the first to notice that it looks like there's a threat of circularity here.
I don't know where my phone is.
We asked what a woman is, and the definition used the word woman when defining the term.
Fuck.
But it may be that there's no actual circularity here if the word woman in the definition means something else than the meaning we're supposed to get from this definition. So let me give you one example. Here's something Vaush said. He said, if you want, you can say a woman is a person who would like to internally and externally adhere to the social roles and expectations associated with a woman, or at the very least, a social archetype. So again, threat of circularity because we're using the word woman there, but suppose we meant woman in the ordinary sense, adult human females, just suppose that's what was meant. So it's not the very same sense to be defined, it's another sense. Well, the problem is that many women won't want that. Many women don't wish to adhere to the social roles and expectations associated with being an adult human female. As Catherine Jenkins has pointed out, a lot of women flout traditional gender norms
about
by, Catherine Jenkins says, for example, not shaving legs. Elizabeth Barnes, another trans-inclusive philosopher, points out that there might be some women with cognitive disabilities such that they lack the ability to have this desire, to conceptualize this desire, to want to adhere to these social roles. And more relevant for our purposes, it could easily turn out that some trans women might not like to adhere to these social roles or these expectations. For example, some trans women who say they don't owe you femininity. So the first point was just, if this definition is not circular, then whatever the word woman means in the definition, it's going to turn out that not all trans women are women. What if it is circular? What if we're told, no, to be a woman is to identify as a woman in the very same sense to be defined? So Vaush is not so sure that there's a problem here. Back in May, he said, my definition of gender, which is just a woman as someone who identifies as one, people complain about it being circular, but I don't think that matters. So I think it does matter for at least two reasons that I'll try to explain. One is that a circular definition can't convey any meaning. It can't actually tell you what the word means. But secondly, even if the word has a meaning, it didn't get it from this definition, but suppose it has a meaning, the statement that to be a woman is to identify as a woman has to be false. It's necessarily false. So I'll explain these two in turn. So one problem is that circular definitions can't convey meaning. Here's one way to see that. What we're being told is that someone is a woman if and only if she identifies as a woman. But now suppose we ask, well, what does it mean? What does woman mean there in the definition? What are you identifying as when you identify as a woman? On this alternative, we're being told the very same sense to be defined. So what you're identifying as is someone who identifies as a woman. That's what you're identifying as, because that's what a woman is. But notice woman shows up again in the definition. And so suppose we do another round of recursion. And now the definition says, to be a woman is to be someone who identifies as someone, who identifies as someone, who identifies as, and you see that this will just keep going. We'll never eliminate the circularity. It goes on forever. We've got this infinite descent. And there's this irredeemable void there in the definition, which means that the definition never expresses any proposition. It never actually tells you what the word means. It just keeps promising you a meaning if you just do one more recursion, but you never get there. So that's one way to see why circular definitions are deficient. Here's another way, it's sort of a little sillier, but suppose I tell you that people collect baseball cards and pogs. I don't really know what a pog is. I collect blargs. And suppose you wonder what a blarg is. And I define it for you in a circular way. I say, look, a blarg is just anything that has this really cool feature. It's a blarg. So clearly that's a circular definition. Now, if you really think that there's no problem with circular definitions,
I'm getting ready for my closing
then
statement.
you should be able to find me a blarg, especially if I give you a hint that there's one in the room with you now, and I offer you $50 if you could just find that blarg and bring it to me. So if there's nothing wrong with circular definitions, you should be able to find a blarg. You should be in a position to know what a blarg is.
Wait, you
But
can do this,
obviously,
though.
you're not in that position.
I'm muted, of course.
You can't find this blarg.
You can use circular
because the
definitions
definition
to
was
derive
circular.
meaning socially.
So that's another way to see why
Because you're
circular
referring to an
definitions are
archetype
deficient.
that shares that term.
Okay, but suppose that somehow the word woman got meaning independently, maybe by pointing or ostension. That's a way that we define words commonly. I think still, even if the word does have a meaning, the claim that to be a woman is to identify as a woman, someone's a woman if and only if she identifies as a woman, that has to be false. And here's why. On this view, on this proposal, if that phrase being a woman refers to anything, then we're told it refers to a very interesting characteristic, a very interesting feature. It's a feature that someone has if and only if she identifies as having it. There's this tight connection between having the feature, being a woman, and identifying as having the feature, identifying as a woman. But if you think about it, I think you'll realize that there simply is no feature like that. There's no characteristic that you could have if and only if you identify as having it. There's no way you could be if and only if you identify as being that way. Just think about ordinary features like being funny or being tall or being rich or something like that. It's one thing to be rich. It's something else to identify as being rich. You could be rich without identifying as being rich. You could identify as being rich without actually being rich, and so on. And this just holds generally for every feature, any property you choose, any feature you choose. And so what that means, what 1 and 2 entail here is, on this view, the phrase being a woman doesn't refer to anything because there's no feature that answers to this definition. There's no such thing. And so a kind of surprising result is, on this view, it looks like there are no women and there are no trans women, therefore. And for our purposes, what follows is it's false that all trans women are women, or at least it's not true. In fact, it looks like none are, because there are no women at all.
That would be all, right? If there are no women.
Okay, here's a couple other views. I think those are sort of the big three, but here are some other views that have been discussed by Vaush. One is gender abolition. On this view, ideally, there are no genders. So ideally, women don't exist. Here's Vaush expressing that sort of view. I think gender is a destructive concept. He says, so eventually I want it gone. Sally Haslinger, trans-inclusive philosopher at MIT, says something similar. She adopted a social role view. She thought to be a woman is to be oppressed. So she says a main part of the project of feminism is to eliminate women, which sounds kind of surprising, but that was her view. So I think we can at least agree that on this view, if you ask how things should be ideally, they would say ideally, there are no women at all. And they would say ideally, there are no trans women. So that's a kind of surprising implication of that view. Here's another one, which I think Vaush might want to defend today. He says in his opening statements that he says prescriptively trans women are women. So that's another view that I've heard expressed in his videos. On this view, when you say trans women are women, what you're actually doing is giving a kind of command or prescription. You're saying you should speak and act as though trans women are women is literally true. You should speak and act as though trans women are women is literally true.
When it comes to the bounds of definitions,
and if you ask why, as Vaush said in his
are
opening statement, it's justified by utility, by good consequences, by benefits. So here's a statement of Vaush sort of expressing that. So he says, what people mean when they say they're women is, woman is a social category I'd like to be a part of. I want to think of myself as part of it and be thought of as part of it. Tali Mae Betcher, a trans philosopher, says something similar. In trans, inclusive, and queer communities, gender presentation indicates how you want to be treated. So if you think that we should treat people how they want to be treated, then when you say trans women are women, what you might be communicating is we should treat people how they want to be treated. We should treat trans women how they want to be treated. Okay, and again, it's justified by utility. So I'll just point out with respect to the prescriptive claim, whether this is something we should do, something that doesn't seem to enter into everybody's moral calculations is whether or not what we're saying is true.
60 seconds left.
60 seconds left.
What?
Okay. And given what I've said so far, it looks like this statement, trans women are women, is literally not true.
What?
And so we can at least agree on that. If we asked this prescriptivist view, strictly speaking, literally, are all trans women women? I think, given what we've said, the view has to say no. Okay, let's see if I can fit this in. I ran out of space on my slide, but sometimes Vaush seems to be a nihilist or an anti-realist about gender. Sometimes he says gender concepts are arbitrary social designations, and in reality, there are no men, no women, etc. Here's a quotation from Vaush back in 2019 saying, all categories are
2019.
socially constructed. They don't exist in nature.
Wait, that's true.
We built them. So if you hold that view and then you ask, well, really, literally, are all trans women women? I think the view has to say no. In reality, no. Okay, so I tried to show that the statement trans women are women is not true on every view we've looked at, including 5 from Vaush. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that opening. And with that, we're going to jump into open conversation. Want to say, folks, thrilled to let you know we have a lot of upcoming debates. You don't want to miss them. So, for example, just confirmed today at the bottom right of your screen whether or not it is okay for kids to go to drag queen shows with, you betcha, Vaush and Alex Stein next Tuesday. You don't want to miss it. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. And with that, we're going to jump into open conversation. Thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
All right. I'm sure that you won't mind after that if I take a moment to respond to your premises, as I have plenty to say, as we it seems we both do. So the issue I have here is that I feel as though you've misrepresented some of my views and definitions here, and what's more, all of these views are incoherent. The construct I often find is that people will treat the biological view as though, because it's the traditionally accepted one, it's the coherent one, but in reality, it's nothing but. There's a reason why Nature, arguably one of the most respected scientific journals in the history of the species, has been putting out article after op-ed about how the idea that sex and gender are the same, or that gender should be considered an extension of a biological category, is ahistorical, ascientific, and just false. And the reason for that is because what you obfuscate when you refer to the biological sex version of gender is the literal millennia of arguments and inconsistencies over what exactly it means to draw that line. Of course, for most of humans' history, we have no idea what chromosomes or even hormone washes are, so only recently has a full understanding of the actual things that differentiate biological males and females even been known to us. But even leaving that aside, long-standing have been the practices of intersex people having their genitals mutilated by doctors who want to get them cleanly fit in one category or another, biologically male or biologically female, often to the psychological detriment of those people, because those doctors are trying to force people into a binary construct that just doesn't work. And the existence of intersex people at all simply destroys the concept of a sex-based gender, because a binary is just that, a binary. You can't have a system that you claim is coherent when it's like, well, 99% of people fit to it. Well, 99% of people leaves out millions. And what are those millions then? Aberrant counterexamples? No, the system never functioned, and it never made that much sense, and it never survived scrutiny, by the way. It's not as though medieval French peasants were undergoing significant sociological analysis of the concept of the social construction of sex. They didn't have sociology back then. It's a fairly modern construction. When it comes to what we talk about, like with the prescription of gender, and all statements of definition are prescriptive, by the way, because we do create these definitions. We didn't unearth them in stone tablets written by God. You know, we had to make efforts to understand them. What we're really doing is trying to find what serves us best. Now, there is meaningful utility in understanding the difference between a biological male and a biological female. There are categorical differences that are worth respecting in a biological sense. But that doesn't encompass the wide variety of social differences between most men and most women that are largely socially ascribed. So when you have this dissonance here, where so much of what it means to be a man isn't actually what it means to be biologically male, in both the modern world and throughout history in many cultures, there are differences between those two things, we have an issue. What is a consistent, rigorous, 100% of the time effective, applicable mode of gender? What works? The answer is nothing. It simply doesn't. It's a stupid concept, and we really shouldn't be respecting it much as a social construct at all. As long as people do respect it, we should go by the definitions that hurt people the least. That is, after all, why we build our definitions, to serve human utility. And to that effect, you call it the self-ID view. The prescriptive view I don't think is inconsistent, but I stand by this. What we mean when we say woman, a woman, is a person who chooses to adhere to a broad, constructed collection of values, aesthetics, forms, roles, and perspectives that we consider to be a part of what it means to be a woman. There is no consistency here, and you'll never find it. No more than you could find consistency in the definition of what it means to be cool. You know, find me a fine line on that. Point in the room where the cool, the cool protons are, or the cool radiation. It's not present, and you'll never find it. But still, we have very strong ideas about what it means to be cool. And we argue, but the arguments are for a purpose. Because finding out who's cool, what's really cool, is socially useful, as is whatever definition we arrive at, which hurts the smallest number of people concerning gender. And that is why I believe trans women are women, because all definitional statements are necessarily prescriptive, and as long as we are dealing with a system that is fundamentally, constructedly absurd, we should at least refer to it in ways that harm people to the least possible extent.
Okay, so you started that by saying you were going to respond to my premises, but I'm struggling to see how any of this responded to any premise of any argument I gave. So let's go through some of the things you said. You said all of these views are incoherent. You said there's no coherent concept of gender. Is that right? Did I get you right there?
You will not find me a definition of gender that is 100% consistent and all-encompassing and has no flaws in it. There are no such things. It can't be found.
So there's no consistent definition of gender. So no matter who I asked, if I asked anybody, what is a woman, no matter what they say, you think there's going to be some sort of impossibility or contradiction or inconsistency.
You will always be able to find a hole or an exception, whether they take a biological or a self-ID, a social role, or an abolitionist perspective. There will always be. Well, gender abolition is a prescription, not a description of current gender states. But no matter what a person's definition of a woman is, there is always going to be something you can pin them on.
Okay, so then it sounds like your view entails there are no women because there's no true definition of woman.
No, not at all. Right? There are plenty of social constructions that I think have meaning and serve utility, even if there are no consistencies to it. I think cool people exist, but I don't think I could ever find a single definition of cool that is perfectly delineates in all categories and situations between cool and uncool people.
Okay, so you said the concepts are incoherent and inconsistent, but I think what you just mean is perhaps vague, so allow for borderline cases, or difficult to articulate. I think maybe that's what you mean when you say all definitions are incoherent and inconsistent, all definitions of gender anyway. I think what you mean is they allow for borderline cases. They'll be vague in various ways. And what was the second thing I said? Vague in various ways and hard to articulate, difficult to articulate. It'll be hard to come up with or express or verbalize a definition that includes everyone who should be included and excludes everyone who should be excluded. So that's the view. I guess I would agree with that. Yeah, definitions are hard to come by typically. And most of them, especially in biology, are vague and admit of borderline cases. But nevertheless, they may be true. There may be true definitions, even if they're difficult to express or articulate. You gave the example, one of your arguments against the biological definition of woman was that we didn't know about chromosomes many years ago. Well, first of all, I don't think biological sex is defined in terms of chromosomes. But let's just use the example of water. Maybe we could agree that water is H2O. That was true even before we knew about chemistry. That was the definition of water before anybody knew anything about chemistry, before we knew about H2O. Back when Aristotle thought water was just an element. Nevertheless, it was H2O. True. I'm sorry?
This isn't true.
That water has not always been H2O?
Yeah, all you have to do is cross the Mexican border. And over there, it's aqua. That's H2O, not water.
Aqua means water. Aqua is water.
It's a different term.
Actually, it's agua. It's not aqua, right?
And we're referring to terms and definitions here.
No, I'm referring to water, the stuff that fills lakes and rivers.
The stuff that fills
about the word water.
Many things fill lakes and rivers.
Okay. Do you honestly not know what I mean when I talk about water, or are you just being a little difficult?
I think you made a mistake before you began that argument, which is that you said just because people didn't always know something doesn't mean that it can't be true. But that can't be the case when we're talking about definitions. Things that are true have constructed premises that lead necessarily to an outcome, a resolution. But a definition is something applied presuppositionally. You can say, for example, that the light, the spectrum of light that we see, the visible spectrum of light, is something that exists outside of our perception. And that is certainly true. But how we perceive it is not existentially correct. And what's more, the definition between red, orange, and yellow is not something that you can find proven anywhere in the real world. We have to arrive at arbitrary distinctions. So that's
Can I just ask you about water again? Do you not think water is H2O?
But I think we've come up with a term to describe what we refer to as water. There are,
Okay,
of course, other cultures that have had
I agree
different...
with you. We came up with a term to talk about water. That
Right.
term is water. And we came up with terms to talk about hydrogen and oxygen. But here's a sentence. Water is H2O. You know what those terms mean. Now think about what idea is expressed by the words. What's the thought that's expressed? We could express it in many different languages. Now think about the thought that's expressed by that sentence. That's true, isn't it? The thought that is expressed by the sentences. Water is H2O.
What do you think?
And it was long before we got here, long before humans got here. Water has always been H2O.
Well, ice, of course, is also H2O, but water is what we define it as within a given, state.
Ice is also water. It's not liquid water.
Yeah, but colloquially, people refer to ice as ice and water as water. Yes. And whether or not they're going to use either of those definitions is going to come down to context. And what about heavy water, 2H2O, or deuterium oxide, which is referred to as water and is in fact a type of water, an isotope, but is not in fact H2O. There's an extra hydrogen atom holding on there, making the substance denser.
So if this is taking me back to chemistry class, but did you say deuterium? Is that right? Is that heavy water?
Yes.
If that's just an isotope, is it an isotope of oxygen that makes that? If that's an isotope, it's still oxygen and it's still H2O, and that is still H2O. That's still water. That's
a different chemical compound than water. Certainly, if people wanted to refer to it as a different type of thing, not water, but let's say they chose the term waterium. I don't know. Scientists come up with wacky names. If they wanted to come up with a term like that to describe it, they would have a significant taxonomical distinction to refer to, a different molecular composition, but we refer to it as water. You might say it's trans water. A bit of a difference, but fundamentally very similar.
Okay. So you're resisting me on the claim that water is H2O. Let me try a different one.
I'm resisting you on definitional prescriptivism. I think that we have...
I'm not prescribing any definitions. I'm just saying water is H2O, true or false. And it sounds like you're reluctant to say true.
No, I agree. I agree that water, and we refer to H2O as water, colloquially. Yeah, of course. I'm fine with that.
So water is H2O. Yeah. And it was H2O long before humans came along.
But water wasn't a concept back then.
I know, but nevertheless, water was there. Actually, water's never been a concept. Water's always been a molecule. Well, we have a concept of water, but the concept is not itself water.
But our understanding of it and the differentiations that we make when we distinguish it from things like heavy water, these are socially constructed. After all, you just said it's still fundamentally water, but we're talking about a different molecular shape. Now, that's because you've arbitrarily branch these two within a category because there's a relationship between them. But that's a social phenomenon. The universe doesn't give a shit whether you refer to heavy water as water or some other, molecule entirely. It's utterly indifferent to your perception of reality. But we still choose to prescribe. And that, I think, a lot of people, when it comes down to definitional games, they start doing this, well, these things are these things. And, we have a lot of power over that. Some animals are different species, but we distinguish what makes something a different species. The taxonomy for what refers to species differentiation, we made that up. We didn't. We invented it. We didn't discover it.
Yeah. So I agree with you that species are the distinction between species is less clear than distinctions we would find in physics and chemistry. So that's why, no surprise, I'm focusing on physics and chemistry. How do we feel about the claim that gold is atomic number 79? Would you agree with that, or are you skeptical of that too?
I think that's how we refer to it as. Sure, I'll take your word for it. I don't have the periodic table memorized.
Yeah, well, I'm benefiting from the fact that this is a bit of a commonly used philosophical example, so that's really why I know that. But yeah, gold, that term in English refers to a certain element that has 79 protons. It's atomic number 79. So gold has been around for a long time, long before the word gold came on the scene. Gold predates the word gold. So anyway, this is just supposed to be an example of a definition that's true, and we went down a rabbit hole a little bit.
What do you mean by true? If we had taken another definition, if we had created another definition to say gold, and the term gold referred to a collection of elements. So let's say gold and lead, and the term gold was something people used to refer to both. that definition would be as true as the one we use today for gold. They would have simply made the choice to include two different elements in their definition, just as you've included standard water and the isotope of heavy water in the definition of water. It's just a definitional game. As long as they distinguish between the two subcategories of gold and iron with their respective atomic weights, the singular term, like how we have terms for metals, we have terms for the gases, the inert gases. Help me out, you know more than me.
Talking about the noble gases.
The noble gases. Yes, we invented those distinctions. We
invented
saw
the terms.
The terms,
Yes.
because the distinctions are only meaningful when we notice them. The universe doesn't care whether or not we think there's something meaningful or significant about noble gases versus the other stuff. We just saw those differences and we're like,
so we saw the differences. The differences were there. The differences are real. And then we came along and decided, you know what, we're going to name these differences. We're going to assign some names to these different elements.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm trying to remember why we started down this rabbit hole. I didn't get very far through the things you said. The first thing I brought up was you had said all these views are incoherent. But then we kind of clarified that what you meant was any of the popular views of women that have been proposed are vague and difficult to articulate. And then I guess I was just trying to point out that a definition might exist and be true even if it hasn't been articulated. Like rewind before humans came on the scene, I would have thought water was H2O even before anyone was around to name water or to realize its chemical essence. So I was just disagreeing with that point about how definitions work. I don't think definitions properly understood are linguistic entities. I think there are facts out there in the world.
There are facts, but wait, I have to challenge that. There are facts in the world, but definitions are categorically linguistic. We create them because we identify differences in things that we see in the world. The facts of the world, there are many, the spectrum of light that we consider to be blue contains within it an infinite range of potential blue values, but we don't have an infinite number of names to describe them. There may be a set number of facts in the world, but the categories we use to separate those facts are entirely up to us and our perceptions. So another example of this would be like in terms of gender prescription. There are cultures historically that have had third genders for a long time. Often the third gender is a biologically male a gender class that adopts roles that are much more similar to the biologically female. There are non-human animals that do this as well. You know, it's not unique to us. And in that case, there's a separate category, and maybe clearly they felt that the categorical difference between these more feminized biological males and the regular biological males was something worth distinguishing in a gender-oriented taxonomical sense. But that's not any more right or wrong than what we do. They just see different meaningful differences and apply different terms. So you can't make these objective arguments about terms. Terms may refer to the facts of the world, but we draw the borders. The land on Earth might be, objective, but the borders of the nations that we build over them, those we rule on paper. We just have to be, considerate of human need when we're describing what here we actually want to build.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, there's a lot I disagree with in there, but I'm trying to be selective or efficient with our time here. Maybe let me just ask you this. It sounded like in your response to me, you raised some objections to the biological view that I expressed that women are adult human females. And you brought up, you said, we haven't always known about chromosomes. Again, I don't think that chromosomes figure into the definition of biological sex. You also mentioned intersex people. So it sounded like you were trying to argue against the reality of males and females. But then at other times you say, there are other cultures that have a third gender that are biologically male. And I think you might agree that there are animals that are biologically male and biologically female. So I guess just let me get clear on your view. Do you think that there are males and females,
of course,
out there in the world?
I believe it's bimodal. There are males and females, and most people will fall pretty solidly on either end of the spectrum. But I do feel there are a significant number of people who are closer to the middle in terms of intersex expression. Oh,
well, if you also think that there are adults in humans, then what exactly is wrong with the definition that women are adult human females? You believe in adults, you believe in humans, and you believe in females. Is it just you think there are counterexamples to this definition? Is that the problem?
My belief in the value of a definition, it should be said first, is not determined by its consistency. There are consistent definitions that are still morally wrong. For example, the Nazis grouped humans into taxonomical categories, which at times were consistent, usually because they were very blunt and lacking in nuance. They were just monstrous and unnecessary. They were suitable to the Nazis in a political sense because they allowed for the dehumanization of large groups of people, but I don't think we review them in retrospect based on their consistency. Like, oh, well, they say any of the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel are subhuman. Ah, well, that's easy to find out with a 23andMe. Of course not. So I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm only saying that my concern here, first and foremost, is not one of consistency. Even if the biological model was perfectly consistent, I would oppose it. But it's not. Because chromosomal abnormalities are all it takes to throw this up for a loop. Especially because when you transition, you do change your sex to an extent. Not entirely, but certainly there are categories of sex that are altered. When you have chromosomes of a certain designation, it determines the hormone washes that you receive, both during puberty and in the womb. And that determines the shape your body takes, the genitalia you form, the ways in which your body develop. But if you have a trans woman who took puberty blockers before she hit puberty, then transitioned medically, you have a person who is, let's say a doctor would not call them a biological male. In terms of the risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, a wide variety of bone and heart-related conditions, this is not a person who'd be going to the doctor and saying, yep, I'm a male, and the doctor would go, yep, your problems are male problems. It wouldn't. So if that's the case, where does that line fall? What about people who have the XXY chromosomal abnormality, or people whose Y chromosome doesn't sufficiently inhibit the development of the X chromosomal female hormones they receive? These categories are not called for, and that's why traditionally doctors have just cut off the aberrant genitalia of intersex people or try to force people into roles that best made them fit a binary. It just doesn't always work.
Okay. Yes. I have watched some of your videos and I've heard your views on biological sex, and I think it's a commonly held view.
I love
about
sex.
What biological sex consists in. I think it is based on a misunderstanding. I don't think that biological sex is defined in terms of chromosomes or genitals or hormone levels. And you can see that by just considering the full range of the plant and animal kingdom and how the sexes are realized across the plant and animal kingdom. And you'll see that there's no facts about genitals figure into the definition, nothing about hormones, nothing about chromosomes. So we can talk about that a little more if you'd like and try to get clear on what biological sex really is. But I just wanted to quickly point out that in my opening statement, what I argued was on all these proposals, it turns out that not all trans women are women. On every proposal, it is false that all trans women are women. So
I disagree.
I'm not really in a position that I need to defend the biological view. If you want to beat up on it and criticize it and reject it, okay. All I said was, if this is what woman means, then not all trans women are women. And I guess we agree on that. But I thought it would have been more pressing, given your views, to try to defend the charges that all those other proposals also entail, that not all trans women are women. And as far as I can tell, you haven't tried to do that yet.
Well, the prescriptive view
would you like to talk about biological sex, or should we move on to something a little more relevant?
Well, the biological sex thing, if it's something you feel the need to defend, we can. I assume this is you're the belief, of course, that a woman is defined by biology.
If you are asking me, what does the word ordinarily mean? Then I think those trans-inclusive philosophers that I quoted are correct. That is what the word ordinarily means. I think
I'm not asking you what it ordinarily means. What do you think it means? What does it mean to be a woman?
What does it mean to be a woman? Well, if you were to ask me, what does it mean to be a computer or a television, or I'm just pointing at things in the room, I would take that question to be asking, what do those words ordinarily mean? I don't have my own private language. I communicate using a public language that we all share. And so if you ask me what a word means, and I didn't know, I might check the dictionary to see what this word ordinarily means.
Is entirely informed by tradition. You are aware, of course, of the fact that the majority of Americans today believe in accepting the identity of trans people by a slim margin. In 20 years, my view will be more popular than yours. Will you switch over then? Are you going to defer entirely to what you see in the dictionary?
Then it would no longer be true that that's what the word ordinarily means.
So
You'd be
okay,
right.
well then sure, then that's fine by me. If we're here to make prescriptions, then sure. My
I haven't made
problem.
any prescriptions.
You defer
I'm
to the
not sure why you
prescriptions
keep.
of others. All definitions are fought for, from the definition of soil in the books of geologists to the definition of skyscraper in the book of civil engineers. Everything is fought for, and I will fight for the definition, the prescriptive view that trans women are women, because there is harm and inconsistency present in other definitions.
Okay, can you tell me what the definition is that you defend?
Sure. I think that woman, like the concept of woman, is an arbitrary and vague collection of aesthetics, values, roles, a bunch of social constructions that are typically tied to sex, that just sort of float in the public conscious. They vary depending on where you are. What a woman is expected to be in the Bible Belt South is very different from what they're expected to be in like Seattle or whatever.
Hold on a second. So when you said in the Bible Belt South, there's something that a woman is expected to be. Can you tell me who it is that's expected to be this way? What does woman mean in that sentence?
Well, whoever they would consider to be a woman, which overwhelmingly would be biologically female people.
Whoever they would consider to be a woman. And what did woman mean there when you said, like, well, let's check who they would consider to be a woman?
I already said biologically female. You don't need to prompt it. I already said it.
Biologically female?
Yes.
Oh, adult human females. You mean?
Well, we are talking about adult humans, I assume.
Okay, so you're saying what woman means is it's this collection of aesthetics, rules, and perspectives that are associated with women. And by women, you mean adult human females.
Yes. Typically, the role of woman in a social construct is one which is tied to sex. But that doesn't mean that it's prescriptively tied to sex. Or to give another example, you're going to see types of music preferences which are heavily associated with people's racial groups or nationalities. But that doesn't mean that there's an inherent prescriptive association there, only that circumstantially these arbitrary associations came to be. Or to put it another way, the type of music that you're going to hear in Thailand hit like #1 charts is pretty different to what you're going to hear like #1 charting over here in America. But that doesn't mean that people over there are biologically inclined to that music as opposed to ours. It's due to proximate bias. People in that area of the world listen to that music because that's the music they have, and because that's the music they have, they pass it down to other people who are around who happen to be people in that part of the world. And likewise, you know, you have an example here of woman, a sort of broad definition, that we do prescribe to biological females. But that's precisely my argument. See, I'm a libertarian here in the classical sense. I don't believe it's right to impart roles and responsibilities onto a person based on their birth genitalia. It's very weird to me. I'm not looking for an end to sex. Biological sex is always going to be a category we have to deal with, you know, for the foreseeable future at least. What I'm against is the idea that some arbitrary hormone washes you received while in the womb should decide a massive category of expectations and behaviors that are assigned to you afterwards. And that's what I'm talking about prescriptively. I don't think we should be saddled with that. True identities should be self-ascribed, which in this case I believe they are.
So this sounds like a view that was expressed in one of the quotations I provided in my slides. It sounds like you're giving voice to a social role view, according to which to be a woman is to, as you said in that quotation, want to internally and externally adhere to a certain set of aesthetics, rules, perspectives, etc. That's what it is to be a woman. To want to, or to actually occupy a certain social role or a certain social position, or
it's
live up to
associated
certain...
with women. I don't think it makes you a woman, though.
Oh, but I had asked you what your definition of woman is. What makes someone a woman? I thought you had answered that, but now we're going to get a different answer.
These go into what woman is, the concept of woman.
No,
A woman, in my prescriptive view, is simply a person who prefers to be associated with that broad range of archetypes.
Any person who prefers to be associated, right? Yeah, that's the social role view. So what do you make of my argument that on that definition, not all trans women will be women?
No, they want to be associated with that broad range of archetypes, but that doesn't mean that their identity is dependent on fulfilling those roles. There are cisgender women.
Not all trans women will want to be associated with those aesthetics and rules and perspectives or whatever.
But they are nonetheless, by choosing to refer to themselves as women. When we think of women,
do you want to adhere to these expectations and roles and so on? I would have thought it's totally possible and probably actual for some trans women to say no thanks.
Sure.
I mean, some women say no thanks, right? Some cis women. So
Of
then
course.
won't it follow then on this view that you're expressing that not all trans women are women?
No, because they still subscribe to the archetype. The archetype merely contains the collection of social values that we associate with women. There are
They
cis
still
and trans women
subscribe.
who, for example, want to be women, but fervently reject elements of what women are expected to be. But this doesn't make them any less of women. I'm only saying they've still chosen to associate themselves with that archetype, much as I choose to associate myself with the archetype of being a man, and there are roles associated with being a man that I'm not interested in adopting or fulfilling.
Okay, so there's this archetypal woman. And I guess if I'd asked you what this archetypal woman is, you would say wears a dress and wears pink
No,
and
no, it's
shaves
just
her. What would you say?
it's a collection of categories. I don't think there could be one archetypal woman because there are so many.
I was worried it was going to be really viciously stereotypical.
No, there can't be one woman because these concepts are arbitrary and stupid. For example,
Well,
it's
when you say
considered
trans women subscribe to the archetype, what is the archetype?
the archetype is defined by its name and all we tie to it. To give you an example,
Oh,
a woman, a stereotypical woman, can be a very maternal, motherly, kind, gentle person, but they can also be like a Jersey Shore, like bratty, mall hopping, selfish type. Now, those are two archetypes of woman and femininity that are completely contradictory. You can't simultaneously be calm, caring, and motherly while also being, selfish, bitchy, and money grubbing. Those don't fit. But nonetheless, they're both considered archetypes of femininity. So it's about associating yourself with the collection of categories rather than representing the singular archetype of those categories.
okay. So you had said a woman is anyone who subscribes to the archetype of woman. And then when I said, what is this archetype? You said it is defined by the name woman, I guess.
The collection of all we associate with it, yeah. And we associate many things with woman, very few of which I think have to do with biology. There's a whole lot of social crap on top that you kind of layer on.
Yeah. There was another quotation I didn't include where you had said something like this, and a way to avoid the circularity worry with a self-ID version of a self-ID definition of woman is to say that woman is anyone who identifies as a woman and then mention the word. Don't use the word, just mention the word. Anyone who is willing to say things like, I am a woman. Anyone who's willing to attribute that word to themselves. So then you avoid the circularity worry. But
I
as I said,
I zooped around it.
Okay. Well, as I said in my opening statement, if this definition isn't circular, then whatever the definition means, it's going to exclude some trans women. And here's how it's going to work in this case. This definition you just provided is going to make it so that being a woman is an English-speaking affair. So there are no women outside of the English-speaking world. You would have to be familiar with the word woman, attribute it to yourself. And so an implication is there are no non-English speaking women, and there were no women before English came along. I find those to be pretty implausible implications.
I think that the category of woman didn't really exist in the form that it does as much as 6 months ago, let alone throughout all of human history. The archetype I'm referring to, this broad collection of tropes and categories that I refer to as like the woman that women associate themselves with. You're right. It may not exist to people who don't speak English, but by the time they learn, there will be a different one. And it's different in every culture, in every neighborhood, in every society, at every point in time. Mm-hmm. It will constantly shift. I don't think there's an objective definition here, but if you're looking for some truly exclusionary stuff, I would agree that any person who was raised by wolves in the forest and had never come into contact with human society could not be described as having a gender. I think their gender would have to be some kind of a recursive, it would have to be like a product of their engagement with social roles and expectations that they would have to develop, even if you could easily identify their sex. But that's the only case, I think, where a human has no contact with gender roles, because they're pretty ubiquitous all over the world.
We've got to jump into the Q&A shortly, so
oh goodness, time flies when we have fun. Sorry.
Okay, well, let me just respond quickly to a couple of things you said. You said it seemed like you were willing to concede that the category of woman didn't exist 6 months ago, you said?
Not this category.
Yeah, so then it sounds like you agree with me that your view does entail there are no women outside of English-speaking contexts. And in fact, you might even agree there were no women 8 months ago. So these are surprising implications, to say the least.
With respect, wait, if I may, with respect, not to get into linguistic traps here, because the concept changes, that doesn't mean that there weren't equivalents across time, culture, and society. German have a concept of Frau, the Spanish have Mujer, or whatever the fuck the Spanish term for woman is,
Yeah.
I don't literally mean the concept, the social collection
The word.
popped into existence here. But you're right, because depending on what word you use to refer to women, whatever word you have for that, it's going to be a different collection of roles.
Who would you be referring to there? You said whatever word you use to refer to women. Who would you be referring to there?
Well, anyone.
Anyone.
No matter what word you use to refer to women as an archetype that will inform to an extent what you imagine women to be. And this is self-evidently true. Go to India. They don't have the word woman for woman, but they have very different expectations of what it means to be a woman over there than we do over here, massively so.
And they have a lot of women there, despite the fact that the word woman doesn't exist. Yeah, I agree.
With respect, I feel like, I don't know how you're interpreting what I'm saying here. They don't use the term woman. I don't know what the Indian term for woman is. I'm sure they have
do, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure
some of them do speak English, but
right.
Go on.
When I say the term doesn't exist outside the definition of woman, what I'm saying is that it is a multifaceted gem that changes with time, and we see it from different facets depending on where we are and what we are. What a woman is so different to like a Southern conservative belle than it is to a progressive living in New York City. In fact, there's such different concepts in terms of the social roles involved that they're practically two different genders, honest to God. That's all I'm referring to. So I'm not literally saying that the archetype, the range of concepts popped up into existence 6 months ago and exclusively exists in English. I'm only saying it's so multivariate, so arbitrary, so meaningless that there are a million variants of it right now, and there were a million more yesterday.
This might be a decent time to jump into the Q&A. I know that you've got another round in the chamber ready to fire.
I love Bogardus, talking with him. Yeah, sorry.
Both of you guys, I know you do, but I do want to jump into these because, folks, I got to tell you, too, I tried to spam the chat and let you know we can't take any more questions. We've gotten a ton of questions, and we have a limited time for the Q&A. These are both busy guys. We want to get them out of here at a decent time. So we're going to jump into it right now. Thanks very much. Elusive Viper says, can you identify someone whose favorite color is red without identifying, quote unquote, red as your favorite color?
Was this a question for me?
Yeah, they hadn't specified in this one.
Can you identify can you repeat the question? Can you identify someone?
Yep, they said, can you identify as someone whose favorite color is red without identifying red as your favorite color?
Can you identify as someone whose favorite color is red without what? Having red as your favorite color?
Without identifying red as your favorite color.
Oh, without identifying. Oh, I think this is supposed to be a counterexample to my claim that there's no feature such that you have it if and only if you identify as having it. And maybe what this person is asking is, isn't this an example? Having the feature of your favorite color is red, or you, as they put it, identify your favorite color is red. Okay, so suppose we're thinking of that feature, having red as a favorite color. Is that going to be necessarily coextensive with identifying as having red as a favorite color? So no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that's going to be another example, just like being rich and being funny and being tall or whatever. It is possible for your favorite color to be red and not know that your favorite color is red and not identify as having the favorite colors of and as having a favorite color of, I don't even know how to finish that sentence, not identify in that way. Here's an example of how that could be. Suppose you're just new to colors. You were colorblind from birth, but a surgery was performed and now you're seeing colors for the first time, but it's just color splotches on the wall and you don't know which color is which, but you know that one's your favorite. So your favorite color is red, but you don't know that this color is red. You don't identify as having a favorite color as red. So that would be an example to show how those two could come apart. Can I just butt in really quick and say, I meant to start the debate in a more sort of ironic way and say something nice about Vaush, but then we just got straight into the straight into the definition stuff. I wanted to say that when I had first gotten this invitation, I mean, I didn't know about this corner of YouTube or Twitch or wherever I am right now. I didn't know about it. But after watching a lot of videos in this corner of the internet, I was really heartened and encouraged by the sort of thing that Vaush is engaged in. debating and exchanging arguments, evaluating arguments, giving objections. Sometimes, a middle-aged person like me worries about kids these days and how they're not really interested in arguments or evidence anymore. So I was just happy to see that there's this community thriving. Again, I don't even really know what Twitch is, but if that's where it is, good for you. And I'm happy you're doing it. And I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Wanted to say that before time ran out.
I'll respond when I get a question then.
You got it. This one coming in from Sphincter of Doom. I think this is for you, Vaush. They say intersex people are still one of two sexes because sex is defined in humans as to what gametes are produced, and every human has only produced at most one of two gametes for reproduction.
So yeah, that's just not true. You can look at any biological journal if you want. The funny thing is that like the definition keeps receding as it keeps getting proven wrong. Like at first it was like genitalia, but that doesn't correspond perfectly to biological sex. And then it was chromosomes, and that doesn't correspond either because there are chromosomal abnormalities that correspond with like intersex. And then it's like gametes, it's like, and they keep running back and running back and running back. Eventually, like people who are super harped in this argument are going to settle on a definition of sex that has absolutely no utility, like their definition of sex is going to be like, okay, here we finally found something consistent. There are only one of two possible outcomes. Whether or not like the half-life decay of this atom spun left or spun right in the exact moment the cell was fertilized, and that's the one thing that determines sex. And it's like, okay, at this point, like, what are you talking about? Like, shut the fuck up. Yeah, it's just not true. But like they can believe whatever they want about biological sex, because like at the end of the day, the biological argument on this has been more or less settled. All the major biological journals are talking about the ambiguity of sex and how it's bimodal and so on. So I feel like at this point there are people far more qualified than I to make that argument about how much variance there is. And to follow up on that, I enjoyed talking with you very much, Thomas, or Dr. Bogardus, I should say. You see, I'm so used.
You can call me Thomas.
Thomas, I'm so used to talking to YouTubers. It's wonderful to speak with people with a higher education, especially ones who take my arguments seriously enough to quote me in their PowerPoint presentations. No, it's been a delight. Thank you for being on here.
Next up from Brenton Langle, a longtime friend of the channel, says H2O is a symbol. Dr. Bogardus, I think that you are confusing the symbol for the real thing it refers to. All symbols and definitions are flawed, as if they weren't, they would be the thing itself and not the symbol.
All right. That wasn't really a question, though.
Correct. You're right. That's true.
So the claim was H2O is a symbol. So, speaking verbally, it's hard to make a use-mention distinction, but if the person meant, quote, H2O is a symbol, well, yeah, I agree. You mean like that symbol, H2O? Yeah, that's a symbol. But if you meant H2O, like the thing that's in this bottle, no, that's not a symbol. That's a molecule that we drink.
I just wanted to say,
and we're not
getting to refer
symbols.
to the heavy water, the isotope of H2O as trans water was like the highlight of this for me. That was a lot of fun.
The term H2O and mentioning the term. So we use the term when we say, there's H2O in that lake over there. We mention the term when we say H2O features the letter H or something. So I guess I don't disagree with what the person said, as long as the person meant mentioning H2O, it's a symbol. Yeah, I agree. Water has 5 letters. Yeah, with quotation marks. Water has 5 letters. Yes. Water has 5 letters. No, water doesn't have any letters at all. The stuff that we drink doesn't have any letters at all.
It's literally an isotope.
That's a pretty basic distinction, but I think it's
There's
important
like an extra electron
to recognize and appreciate.
Hydrogen.
All right.
You got it. Sphincter of Doom strikes again, says heavy water isn't
Neutron,
an extra
whatever.
hydrogen. It's an extra neutron in the hydrogen. It's still H2O.
Yes. Okay, so I think I got that wrong if I said it was an isotope of oxygen that makes it, is it deuterium? Did we say that? So it's an isotope of hydrogen. It's an isotope of hydrogen. So I guess it's 1 proton and 1 neutron. Is that right? Whatever. Still H2O though. Yeah, well, I guess I need to wait until it's appropriate to respond to the biological sex stuff. So maybe I'll get a question about that. I'll just hold tight.
You got it. This one from Sid Dave says, I can answer that question. Let's see. No, there are not, no matter how many surgeries. Let's see. Okay, that's not as Brenton Langle, there's your question, says H2O is not water in the same sense that the pipe and Rene Magritte's, let me know if I'm saying that wrong, treachery of images is not a pipe. You are falling for the treachery of concepts.
Yeah. Right. So I think they're referring to that painting of a pipe, and then it says this is not a pipe.
I don't know what this means.
It's a painting. It's not a pipe. So it's doing the equivalent of mentioning a pipe, but there's no actual pipe there. So I think this is the same as the last sort of statement I got when I was told H2O is a symbol, not a molecule. Yeah, H2O is a symbol, but H2O, the stuff in lakes and rivers, is not a symbol. This is just a difference between word and object. But I can assure you I appreciate that distinction, and I hope
French.
we all do.
I'm not looking up anything that's French.
You got it. This one from David Crackle says, if ice can be water, why can't a trans woman be a woman?
Oh, wow. If ice can be water, which it can be, I think it is water because it's H2O, why can't a trans woman be a woman? I assume that question's for me. Well, ice is water because, come to find out, it's the same stuff that liquid water is. It's all the same stuff, just in different phases. It's all H2O. It's the same thing, just in different arrangements. That's why ice
But aren't everything,
is water. It's not liquid water, it's
just
solid water.
protons, neutrons, and electrons?
So now
Isn't
the question
everything
is
the
a trans
thing in
woman a
different
woman?
arrangements?
Well, that would depend on
I'm
what
muted.
woman
I'm just
means,
saying,
and then
like,
we'd have to
depending on where
check.
you arbitrarily draw the line
Whatever
for
woman
association.
means, is it the case that being a trans woman guarantees that you're a woman in that sense? And I think the reason, as I said, this is such a persistent philosophical puzzle is it turns out that on all the views that are sort of being discussed in the literature,
Yes.
the answer is no. It doesn't turn out that all trans women are women. Whatever woman means, it's going to be possible for someone to identify as a woman while being assigned male at birth, but not meet that definition of woman.
I feel like that wasn't a problem with my
You got
definition.
it. And this one for Vaush. Made by Jim Bob says, if the term woman is a construct, doesn't that mean, quote, trans women are women isn't actually true and is just a construct itself?
Something being a construct and being true aren't mutually exclusive. Most things that we say when we're referring to interpersonal interactions are only true in a constructed sense, but I still think that they're true, you know. Otherwise, I mean, what does it mean for a person to be tall? You know, there's no set definition of what percentage or what, like, how many orders of magnitude above the average height of a given type of person, a given type of area. Like, there's no, just because something's constructed doesn't mean it's not true. You know, you can say a person's 7 feet tall and be true as hell to that, but finding a concrete definition, a non-constructed definition of tall is not something you're going to be able to do. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with something being socially constructed. I just think we should be aware of how much power we have to rearrange these terms as we see fit. That's not playing God. That's what we've always done. We've always done that forever. It's all we can do. We made language, you know? I just think that we should use it responsibly.
You got it. Singdra Doom strikes again. This one for you, Vaush, says, sex is the reproductive condition of an organism. In humans, this is achieved via gametes, and there are only 2 gametes in humans that leads to reproduction: chromosomal aneuploidy, which meaning whether there's a lack of chromosome or an extra chromosome compared to usual, is irrelevant, they say.
Yeah, so keep switching up the definition of what sex is. It was all chromosome years ago. No, again, like, the biological community has made its mark on this. The idea that sex is purely binary and not bimodal is just not something taken seriously in studies to this effect. So it seems quite silly. Look, again, like, even if you could like 100% male female differentiate, it wouldn't change any of my prescriptions. You could make it, you know, so flatly and unchangeably biologically male and female with nothing in between, and I would still say what I say. It's not really relevant to my arguments. It's only the fact that you're wrong gives credit to the argument that the biological differentiation is inconsistent at best and quite harmful as well. You know, also, talking about gametes, like anyone looks at a person's gametes when they're trying to gender a person. Come on. That's always been the silliest argument, right? They start going back before. First it was what genitals are like, you have tits or not, or what your hair looks like, and then it goes further and further in. You know, I'm telling you, it's going to be the half-life, the radioactive decay, that spin that you're going to get, and that'll determine it. We'll just judge we'll decide whether people wear suits or dresses based on that spin.
Made by Jim Bob says, Vaush, can someone with Benjamin Button disease, if you guys, namely like aging backwards, claim an age inconsistent with birth date, but consistent with their apparent biological age?
I don't entirely know what that means, but if this is a question of like being trans age or whatever, keep in mind we're talking about magic here. I mean, you would have a person who's like what, 5 years old, but has every imaginable a trait associated with an 85-year-old or something. I have no, I gotta tell you, I don't know how the legal system or the philosophical community would handle the existence of such a person. I imagine if they had the knowledge and wisdom and experience of an 80-year-old, even if they were only 5 years old, they would probably be treated as like an 80-year-old because they're like they look and act like one. I don't really know though. You got when that happens, okay, you can try to stump me.
You got it. This one coming in from Raymond Ryder, appreciate it, says, Vaush, is it the case that you're engaging in an ameliorative project when you mentioned normative standards for definitions? Isn't this just shifting the subject?
I love to ameliorate the conjugated definition of the the superlative. Wait, what was it? I can't tell if that was a real question or if it was making fun of how I talk. Which either way, fair.
I could explain it if you want. That was a sort of question from.
Oh, was it an actual question? Whenever I hear the word ameliorate, I assume people are making fun of me because I use that word the way most people use ums. Wait, James, can you repeat it? I just need to hear it again. I'll take it more seriously.
It's the first time I've ever seen ameliorate, or in this case, ameliorate.
It's a technical term from the literature. I'd be happy to just tell you what it means if you want.
No, I know what it means. I just wasn't listening to the question because I assumed I was listening for like funny. I was thinking of funny jokes that I could say in response.
They said Vaush seems to be engaging in an ameliorative project when he mentioned normative standards for definitions. Isn't this shifting the subject?
No, I don't think there are any types of other arguments that you can make when it comes to definitions. I think that at the end of the day, even when you're making descriptive arguments about definitions, you're ultimately making the prescriptive statement that we should adhere to the commonly accepted descriptive statement. I don't think there's any way around that. After all, these are things that we construct. I mean, we all, it's a little bit like slavery, right? Like people make arguments for and against it, or at least they used to. Well, they still do, but they did more in the past, But if a person's only statement on the subject is slavery exists for X reasons, even though that would be a descriptive argument, if that was all they contributed to the discussion, it would still serve the role of a soft prescriptive argument in favor of the institution. Because when something exists and has the capacity to be changed, an acceptance of and passive defense of the purpose of such a system is considered to be a kind of soft prescriptive argument for it. So, of course, I'm not saying this all slavery. I'm just saying, it's
you got
known
it.
To
and
happen.
Then, Dr. Bogardus, are you saying that in the specifically the word ameliorative is a concept or term from the philosophy of gender?
Ameliorative inquiry is a little phrase that has a very specific meaning in this philosophy of gender literature. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you what it means?
I'm curious.
Okay. It's just it's sometimes called conceptual engineering. And it's the project I described when I said, like, hey, we've got this biological definition. Even trans-inclusive philosophers agree that's what the word has historically meant. But then when I said, like, they don't like that, they don't recommend it, they think that we should use the word woman to express a different concept. And when they're deciding which concept to express with the word woman, they call this, this is ameliorative inquiry. It's a kind of inquiry or attempt at coming up with an analysis that is meant to make the world a better place, to ameliorate injustices. And so there are explicitly moral inputs into the project. They're asking themselves what concept would do the most good in the world. And so I think Vaush is engaged in this sort of project. But yeah, it is a technical term from the literature. So the worry is by doing that, by self-consciously using an old word to express a new concept, you're changing the subject. So feminism was about the cause of women, adult human females. But now we're just using the word woman and expressing a new concept, maybe the social role view or the self-ID view or something like that. And so we're not talking about women anymore. We're talking about something else. We've changed the subject. So this is a common worry about the whole conceptual engineering project. We'll just be changing the subject. But I think just for what it's worth, I think that's the least serious worry. I think the more serious worry is all the definitions that have been proposed are trans exclusive.
You got it. And this one from Mr. Saxaki says, Dr. Bogardus, what is your own definition, though, of woman? And by your own logic, it can't be cultural, nor social, nor plastic, nor prescriptive.
Nor plastic. Oh, wow. Nor prescriptive. So again, if you just ask me what is my definition, I would say I don't speak like a little private language. I speak a language shared by a community. And so I think the question is just, what does this word ordinarily mean? What has it meant for the history of feminism up until at least the second wave? What did it mean? And again, trans-inclusive philosophers agree, ordinarily, historically, traditionally, it's meant adult human female. And I'm just going to use this opportunity to say what it is to be female or what it is to be male. So I agree that if you ask people what is biological sex or what is it to be male or what is it to be female, you'll often get from ordinary people answers in terms of genitals or chromosomes or maybe hormone levels or maybe like stereotypes. I don't know if you watched that Matt Walsh documentary, but he asks people, what is it to be a woman? And you get these sorts of definitions in terms of genitals, stereotypes, and so on. But as we briefly discussed during our little back and forth, if you accept that sexual reproduction occurs across the animal and plant kingdom and has been going on for a very long time, longer than Saturn has had rings, it turns out, longer than Polaris, the North Star, has existed. This is a very old sort of strategy that organisms have used to reproduce. You'll realize that genitals are not required. I'm told, I haven't actually checked, but I'm told that a lot of male birds just lack external genitals entirely. There's no particular sort of chromosome structure that you need in order to be male or female. If you just think about how plants do it, it's super complicated. Think about how a platypus does it. It's very, very different from how we do it. Hormone levels aren't required. You don't need any sort of particular hormone level.
How can he defer to public definitions when he's using a hyper
that
nuance?
Reproduces sexually is something called, I think it's pronounced placozoa or something, a placozoa. And it's only a couple thousand cells.
He's going for a hyper-specific definition that nobody uses when they think of woman. But then he's like, I just defer to the
some
common.
Of them produce sperm. Some of them produce eggs. That's all that biologists have ever meant by male and female. Now, I agree that ordinary people have been confused about what it means to be male and female, and sometimes they're confused by a sort of chauvinism about our own species.
Wait, how can they be confused
if you just think about what biologists mean when they study other organisms, when they say of a flowering plant, here are the male parts and here are the female parts, they are talking about gametes. And when they say males produce sperm, females produce ova, they mean the same sort of thing that they would mean if they said hearts pump blood, kidneys filter waste. They mean when functioning properly. This may be interfered with due to age, disease, injury, etc. But when functioning properly, that's what happens.
Wait, I have to jump in briefly. How can you defer to traditional definitions when using one that you have to correct the majority of people on? The majority of humans, when asked what it means to be a man or a woman, are not going to give the definition you just provided. Yeah. They're like, the common definition was the one you were referring to earlier, the traditional one, the one you use in light of or in absence of a prescriptive one.
Yeah.
But now you're making a prescriptive statement that maybe 1 in 1,000 humans would even get in the ballpark of. And you can't even defer to scientific definitions either, because the science on this matter, if you go to American Scientific or nature.com, don't agree with you. You're deferring to a definition which is neither scientifically accepted or commonly accepted. So why earlier were you talking about how you just deferred to the commonly accepted one? And you said that you don't want to weigh in on this topic as to what it means because, you just go with what's commonly accepted. That's not the case at all. It's not commonly accepted. What it means to be a woman is literally one of the most hotly discussed topics today. It's hugely contentious. I mean, that's like somebody asking you what honor means, and you're like, well, I go by the historical definition of honor. But there is no single historical definition of honor, certainly not when used today. It varies massively. It feels like you're trying to assume the legitimacy of the common definition when the one you use is used neither commonly nor specifically by scientists.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is a good point, Vaush, and this really brings up something that we disagree very deeply about. Namely, I think when you use the word definition, what you really mean is like the conception that people have in their minds when they use a word. So if I were to ask someone, what does male mean? They might say, XY chromosomes or something like that. And you say that's their definition. But I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the right use of the word definition. I would have thought that you don't look towards their conceptions, the sort of associations they have in their mind when they use a word. And you don't even look at the way people use words, because it's possible for a word to be systematically misused. What you should look at is what the word actually refers to. It might be commonly misused, and people might have mistaken conceptions about what it is. But the true definition, the real definition.
So you just get
of
to
the word,
infer
hold
the
on.
divine definition, like all the
No.
people are wrong. The science. Well,
We
what is a
do
true
investigation. Let me
definition?
give you an example. If you had asked Aristotle what is water, he might have given you his conception, and he would have said something like it's an element, although he would have said it in Greek. Yeah, and it might have been possible. Yeah, it's probably possible that some people have systematically misused the word water if they were unwilling to attribute it to ice. But here's how we figured out what water is. We did some chemistry and we investigated the lakes and the rivers and the ice, and we found out, oh, wow, turns out water is not an element. It's a molecule, it's H2O. We did something similar with biological sex. We noticed this interesting distinction in nature, which I think you yourself acknowledge. There's this phenomenon of sexual reproduction, and we get these two subtypes within a lot of species. Some of them produce sperm, some of them produce ova, at least when functioning properly.
We're talking about what it means to be a woman, though.
Well, I was talking about what biological sex is a moment ago.
Well, biological sex, which
Yeah.
you think infers what a woman is.
Which I think implies what a woman is.
I agree that it might imply it. I don't think that implication is necessarily prescriptive determination, though.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I was just being a little pedantic there. Inference is something that people do. Implication is something propositions do. Don't worry about it. So I guess you're referring to the fact that I said ordinarily the meaning of the word woman is adult human female. That's the meaning.
No, my issue is that it feels like earlier you were taking a non-prescriptive tone where you were just referring to commonly accepted definitions, which only work if you're thinking about like modern history, the West, because
Yeah.
when you brought out, there are plenty of counterexamples. But then when it comes to like, okay, well, what do I believe? Then you have a hyper-specific definition, and you justify the validity of that definition by saying that it differs not from utility, not from common acceptance, not from popular use, but rather from it being a true definition, which seems like an ontological distinction that you're receiving from God. But I'm afraid I'm not hearing the voices in my head. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, oh boy. So a lot just happened there. So when I described that biological view, I did claim this is what the word ordinarily means. I might have said this is the way it's ordinarily used, and I think that's right. I don't think it's being ordinarily misused. But if I were going to state the claim as precisely as possible, I would say this is what the word ordinarily means. And when I say that, I don't mean to say this is what people ordinarily have in mind when they express the word, because obviously they don't. If you ask ordinary people, what is a woman? They're like, this is something Socrates discovered. You know, you ask people about ordinary terms and they're at a loss to articulate a definition. So when I say this is what the word ordinarily means, I don't mean this is what people have in mind when they use the word. I don't even mean necessarily this is the way the word is ordinarily used, because again, use is at best an imperfect guide to meaning. What I mean is this is what the word refers to. As it's ordinarily used, I don't think it's misused. This is what the word refers to.
How do you decide what it refers to?
So the same way we did with water. Aristotle was interested in the same sort of stuff that we were interested in. We have different words for it. He thought it was an element. We have discovered through scientific investigation that it's a molecule. And now we know water is H2O. We did that through scientific investigation. We did something similar with biological sex. I mean, Aristotle was aware of this phenomenon, but he was not aware of the gametes involved. We have discovered the scientific essence of biological maleness and biological femaleness through scientific investigation.
There's no such thing as a scientific essence. You can discover facts of the world, but the categories that you apply on top of those facts are something that we have to make decisions about. So you can look at water and determine consistently that, you know, H2O, this number of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, because that's an observable fact of the universe. But as soon as you start to draw lines between things and assign names to those different categories, you are engaging in arbitrary speculation, ones which can only be defined through the utility served by doing so. all of this differentiation that we talk about. The only reason we distinguish between males and females is because we feel it provides us some utility. But when we talk about what we're referring to on a fundamental level, the fact of the matter is, when it comes to sex, there's a ton of variance, not just in our own species, but others. It's not just chromosomes. There are sex characteristics that vary tremendously, even within cis people. And there's no hard line when we look at those things. And I don't think there's a perfect track record of assigning that, like, categorization onto gender either. In fact, I know for a fact there isn't, because there are cultures with third genders. So I don't know what you mean by the true essence here, but I don't feel as though this mode of investigation gives us a better understanding of what it means to be a woman.
So when I said we've discovered the scientific essence of water, what I meant was H2O. We've discovered the essence of gold, which is atomic number 79. This is something we've discovered through chemical investigation. That's all that's necessary to be gold, is to be atomic number 79. Of course, the Greeks were aware of gold. Humans throughout time and place have been aware of gold. They weren't aware of what it is, essentially. Chemistry disclosed that to us. That's what I meant by scientific essence. And I think biologists did something similar with biological sex. There were sort of crude theories about how sexual reproduction is accomplished back in the early days of science. We have since discovered facts about sperm and eggs, and that was a discovery of the scientific essence of biological sex.
Them. Like the fact that we consider isotopes to still be a member of that element. And if an isotope has one extra neutron, we consider that to be a member of the same element, but just a different isotope of it. But if we wanted to, we could have simply said, oh, that's just another element. It's another element with a separate name that has a separate molecular structure. And they would have pointed at it and gone, ah, yeah, well, that's, obviously it's very similar to this other element, but as you can see, there's an extra neutron, so it can't possibly be the same, as this previous one. But that's what I mean. Like discovering facts of the world is not the same as taxonomy. It's not the same as categorization.
I want to give Dr. Bogardus the last word, just because the question was originally for him, and then we've got one last question for the Q&A before we wrap up.
I kind of forgot what the original question was at this point. I guess I'll just, I don't really want the last word to be about noble gases, but here we go. I guess I just deny that when we're investigating the world, our primary interest when we decide
the elements are defined by
what words should we introduce, what distinction should we make. I don't think our primary interest is utility. Rather, we're interested in the truth. If it had somehow turned out that not distinguishing between the noble gases had somehow benefited humanity, if we had learned that, if we just stick with Aristotle's view, where we've just got these 5 elements, humans will be much better off. Scientists wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have cared. They just wanted to know the truth. And they saw these distinctions between the noble gases, and they were like, let's introduce some terms to name what's already there. I think that's what we did in physics and chemistry and in biology.
This one coming in?
What?
Sorry about that. Go ahead. I didn't interrupt.
Nah, that was probably as good a time as any to stop.
We'll jump in with this last question. And then I want to remind you folks, our guests are linked in the description. So if you have not heard enough, if you're like, I want to hear more, I want to learn more about their views, you certainly can by clicking on those links in the description box below. And here is that question. Brandon Hansen asks Vaush, can a person who has male genitalia, XY chromosomes, has absolutely no values / archetypes that has ever been associated with any vague definition of women, but takes the name of woman, are they?
Yes. Though I have to say, I have no idea what a human would have to be in order for their behavior, personality to have no overlap with any of the many incompatible, incoherent, and self-contradictory values we associate with what it means to be a woman. They would have to be remarkable. I'm trying to think of like a male actor. Even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson acts kindly and charitable sometimes. Every time he smiles, well, smiling is considered a feminine characteristic. So yeah, I don't know. You would have to find a brick, like a proper brick. But God bless her. Transitioning saved her.
You got it. And with that, I want to say, folks, we really do appreciate our guests. As I mentioned, you can find their links down below in the description box. That includes if you're listening at the podcast, because we put our guest links in the description box there too. So I want to say one last thank you. It's been a true pleasure for this very cordial, stimulating conversation. Vaush and Dr. Bogardus, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both.
It's been a tremendous pleasure. Thank you very much.
100%. Stick around, folks. I'll be right back with a post-credit scene letting you know about upcoming debates that you don't want to miss. With that, Thanks so much
I'm gonna
one
mute my
last
hand
time to our
for a second.
guests, and I'll be right back in just a moment. And we're backstage. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Appreciate it, Vaughn. It was good meeting you. Good talking to you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Okay, I'm back. I just feel if it's the back room, so I mute myself and I mute them. Oh, I didn't mute them, did I? Oh, I forgot to mute them. Oh, I just muted me. Oh, I'm so fucking dumb. Knew I forgot something. Well, whatever. It's not like anything got leaked. Okay, listen, this is the point that I'm trying to make at the end, okay? Definitions in and of themselves can't be right or wrong. Definitions can be contradictory, but that only means the two are contradictory, not that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. Definitions can also be useful or not useful, but again, that's not the same as being right or wrong. So here's an example of what I mean, okay? Right here, the periodic table, okay? So he was distinguishing between utility and truth, but there's no contrast because the thing that he kept doing was he kept conflating between the obtaining of facts of the world and the categorization of those facts. He kept saying like, well, you find the truth of things like the way we did with water. Okay, but that you're referring to a fact of the world, not categorizing those facts. So an example would be, if you take a look at the periodic table, everything here is a fact of the world. The number of protons and atomic weight and everything, like that's a fact of the world that exists whether or not we do, okay? But the decision to group noble gases, don't get me wrong, noble gases do have plenty of things in common. I don't know what they are. I'm not a chemist. You know, they do have things in common, but the reason we group them, we didn't group them because like the universe distinguished them. The only reason the periodic table is shaped this way is because of human need. Have you ever wondered why 1 with hydrogen starts over 2 and then helium is on the other side all the way over here? And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We grouped it arbitrarily in order to like collect elements that have similar features. But their similarity is determined by our perception of their usefulness. You know what I mean? Like I've said this before about like the way the way things become useful or whatever, okay? But like I'm trying to think of like, okay, imagine that like humans, the civilization ends, all right? And all of our shit gets washed away by time and our ruins fade to dust. And 1,000,000 years from now, aliens come to Earth and they find like our rubble. And all of this shit is meaningless to them. They have absolutely no understanding what anything they're looking at means. There's no clue. Like, because it's so damaged, like they have no idea. Their technology is way beyond ours. Ours was back when we died off, like whatever, okay? Like, the way they would group and categorize things from our culture is not the way we would group and categorize things. Like, I would group and categorize stuff based on its usefulness to me. Water bottle helps me drink when I'm not near the sink. Game controller helps me lose an Elden Ring. This berserk Shirka and Guts clock is cool, and I like looking at it. You know, a chicken is a chicken. Like, that's what all this means to that, like, to me, right? But to them, like, they wouldn't have the same associated meanings. They might group things based on elemental composition or based on color, you know? Like, they might look through these ruins, see nothing but aesthetic value because nothing here is practically useful, and they might just collect things based on texture or color, you know? Like, that's the thing. And they wouldn't be wrong to do so. It's just like the usefulness relative to them. Does that make sense? Do people get what I'm talking about? Yeah, but on the table of elements grouped the same or chemically identical. No, you don't understand. This is what I mean. You're in the brain prison right now, which really bothers me. The only reason you think they're identical is because we're looking at characteristics useful to us. To a person who's only looking at color, this lotion bottle and this remote have characteristics that are identical because they both reflect white. You're projecting. They're similar, but the similarities are something that we determine, you know? Or to put it another way, imagine meeting a bunch of different alien races. Do you think all of the different alien races would all arrange the periodic table in the same way as us? I think that if you believe that, you're very arrogant. They might have the same understanding of elements as us, but the idea that they would arrange it in exactly the same way, I think is very, very silly. And we're talking about something that's very concrete, very material. When we're talking about something like biological expression of sex, this is like so taxonomy based. It's so up to our definitions. Like species. Like imagine Imagine like an alien race coming to Earth and then seeing all the animals we have and like coming up with the same number of species as us, right? Like there's no objective number of species, you know? Of course that wouldn't happen. Look up different forms of the periodic table. There are literally different forms of the periodic table right now. To anyone who said we would arrange it in the same way, you're already wrong. You're already wrong within human culture. Within our own culture. Like, there's a whole Wikipedia page called Alternative Periodic Tables. None of these are wrong, by the way. None of these are incorrect. They're just different ways of organizing the same information based on the biases and perceived needs of the people who arrange them. We might argue that some of them are more useful than others. By metal classification, by periodic table structure, list of chemical... Yeah. Vsauce has my favorite video on the subject. Yeah, Vsauce's video, Do Chairs Exist, is basically like a version of this. Like the ambiguity of definitions. Yeah. Yeah, there's also no objective reason math needs to be base 10. Exactly. Yeah. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No. Wait. This is hard to do. 6, 7, 8, 9, schmlorp, 10. And then you would have a base 11 system. Like we have Mayans worked in base 20. Yeah, and like there are languages that are base 12. Binary is base 2 or whatever. There are also no correct maps. Yeah, there's no such thing as a correct map. All maps of the world rely on distortion in order to project a 3D surface onto a 2D plane. All of them lie in some way or another, you know? And none of them is right or wrong. There's no such thing as right or wrong, you know?